Hi everyone, this is Karen Hooley, and I'm here to teach you 3 different slip knots. Let's get started. The first slip knot I want to show you is called the Big E. And I call this the Big E because it seems to be the best way to teach kids that are 6 years old or older. I don't usually start them before 8, but if I do have a student that comes in that's younger, this seems to be the best slip knot that works for them. Now, the reason I call it the Big E is because it actually does look like an E. When you create the E, what you're doing is you're taking the tail and you're creating a lowercase e. So it looks like a lowercase e. And notice that the tail of the yarn is crossing underneath the working yarn that goes to the skein of yarn. The next step of the Big E is to put your fingers inside the circle here in the middle of the E. And I usually put my finger right here to hold those strands that are crossing each other so they don't uncross. And I stick my fingers into there and I grab the working yarn. And I pull it through to make a loop. So you see here, I've got a loop coming through right here. The next thing I do is I swing this tail back to run parallel with the working yarn. I grab both the working yarn and the tail and I pull. And you'll notice now here I have a nice loop with a nice slip knot. And if I pull the tail or the working yarn, actually in this case it's the working yarn, if I pull the working yarn, I can adjust the size of the loop. And that is the Big E. Now the second way I make a slip knot is what I call the pretzel. Now the pretzel is another way I teach children how to crochet or how to make a slip knot, not a crochet. I guess it is part of crochet, isn't it? But I usually teach older children, usually maybe around 10 or older, because there's a little more dexterity that you need when you're learning how to do the pretzel. Now to do the pretzel, what you want to do is you want to start with your tail. And what I usually do is I try to hold the working yarn so it doesn't move too much. And I take the tail and I create a pretzel shape. Oops, we're going to need a little more yarn here. So I create a pretzel shape that goes something like this. Now I take the tail and I make sure it goes underneath here. Oops. Let's try that again. Okay, so that's more of a pretzel shape. Now you'll notice here that both the working yarn and the tail are underneath this loop that forms the pretzel. And here's the cross at the top of the pretzel. So now what you do is you put your finger on top of that crossed bar. I take my crochet hook and put it underneath just that one bar on the right hand side. If you're left-handed, you can do it exactly the same way. Your hook's just going to go in from this direction. So it doesn't matter which direction you're coming from, but use the one on the right. Put your hook under there, then you grab your tail and your working yarn together. Make sure they don't come uncross. Sometimes they do. There we go. And then pull. And see, there's your knot. And you can pull the yarn to adjust. This time it's the tail that you pull to adjust the knot. And that's how you do the pretzel. Now I'm going to teach you the way I make my slip knots. My grandmother taught me this when she was teaching me how to crochet, and even though I had small hands at 7 years old, I was still able to master this. So you can definitely teach this to children, but I usually teach adults how to do this. And if you've ever taken one of my live classes, you'll know that this is the way I teach in my live classes as well. So start, and you can do this right-handed or left-handed. The instructions are exactly the same. The first thing you want to do is take the tail in your right or your left hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to do it right-handed, but if you're left-handed, you can do it with your left hand as well. And I have these 3 fingers out in front on my opposite hand. And what I do is I start wrapping around the front of my fingers to the back, and then come back again around the front, and I crisscross them over the top, and then I let the tail dangle at the back. Then I put my thumb on top of those cross strands and take my fingers out. And sometimes I do it faster when I'm actually doing it, so it kind of gets a little confusing here at first. So when I take my fingers out, I've got them crossed still under my thumb here, but here's the loop that my fingers were in. I put my fingers from front to back inside that loop and grab the tail. And then I quickly move my fingers over. I'm using my thumb to keep them crossed there. But I grab both the working end and the tail right here together, and I hold that loop that I'm pulling through, and I just pull, and there becomes the knot. And then I just can adjust by pulling the strands there. Now I'll do it one more time so that you can see how I do it quickly. That's how I do it. So those are my three ways to do a slip knot. I'd really love it if at the end of this video you go down into the comments and tell me if you use any of these or which one's your favorite of what I've shown you. And if you have another way of doing it, I'd love to hear about it. So please be sure to go down to the comments and let me know. Also, if you really like this video, I really hope you'll give it a thumbs up, and also give me a subscribe, because every week at least one video will be released. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.